The air hangs thick with the tang of ozone from the transmitter tubes, a low, steady hum vibrating through the reclaimed console. Dust motes dance in the single neon bar that flickers above hand-labeled vinyl records, the smell of warm electronics and stale coffee clinging to the patched leather of the chair. Outside, the city breathes a 1966 rhythm, but in here, 2036 whispers through the static. Sir.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Across Oranjezit, the dial sits at 51 Fahrenheit under partly cloudy. Wind check, south-southeast at 6 miles an hour. Welcome to the sonic blueprint, architect. Across Oranjezit, the dial sits at 51 Fahrenheit under partly cloudy skies. Tonight, we're sharpening our internal compass with sovereign architect framing, asserting autonomy, integrating logic and emotion, discerning signal from residue, and building resilient civic structures that favor consent, provenance, and dignity. Hold that thread. Next signal. Australia Politics Live, Tim Wilson says coalition needs. Our first signal rides in from Australia, where the government is scrutinizing consulting firms.
The federal government has released an options paper, aiming to improve regulation of these powerful firms. This follows charges laid against EY employees. Specifically, 2 EY graduate employees accessed Prime Minister Albanese's bank details while on secondment. The structural tension between corporate self-governance and public trust is stark. Will new oversight truly shift accountability, or just redraw the lines on the existing blueprint?
Steady your stance. The federal government's options paper targets regulation of accounting, auditing, and consulting firms. This move directly responds to charges against EY graduate employees who, on secondment, accessed Prime Minister Albanese's bank details. The dynamic between industry control and governmental enforcement is clear. New rules could redefine oversight mechanisms.
The federal government released an options paper for regulation. Charges were laid against EY graduate employees. These EY personnel accessed Prime Minister Albanese's bank details. The conflict between corporate data access and individual privacy rights is immediate. How do we secure personal information when institutional safeguards seem to falter?
The challenge here is how we assert unwavering autonomy over our digital selves when corporate structures hold our data. For March finalization, raw exposure, instead of another options paper, imagine a public registry of all private sector data access points within government, audited quarterly by an independent, citizen-led data council. The real next move is practicing sharp discernment to separate toxic residue from architectural signal, ensuring our civic structures prioritize provenance over profit, not just compliance. Static lifts for half a breath, the vinyl crackles under the needle, the line is live. Patching in a caller, the pattern auditor. You're on the signal.
So, more papers, more talk about trust. Does anyone truly believe new regulations change the nature of the beast, or just give it new camouflage?
Switching frequencies. Next signal. US Supreme Court lifts campaign spending restrictions ahead. Your sharp ear hears the echo of old patterns, pattern auditor. That's exactly why we talk about sovereign architect framing, to build beyond camouflage. Let's shift our focus to the United States. The Supreme Court just lifted campaign spending restrictions ahead of midterms. This changes the game's foundation.
The U.S. Supreme Court lifted restrictions on campaign spending. This 6-3 decision directly impacts political parties coordinating with individual candidates. The pull between free speech rights and fair electoral competition is now wider than ever. Does more money equal more speech, or just a louder echo from privileged platforms? This affects the very consent we build our civic architectures upon.
Find your center. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 to lift spending restrictions on political parties coordinating with candidates. This decision invoked the First Amendment's free speech protections. It could significantly impact the November midterm elections. The tension between individual campaign finance limits and party spending is pronounced. How do smaller voices compete against such amplified financial power?
The U.S. Supreme Court lifted campaign spending restrictions. The 6-3 ruling impacts midterms. It directly affects the money political parties spend coordinating with candidates. The conflict between individual voter influence and large-scale financial power is undeniable. Is this ruling truly about expanding expression, or just expanding the reach of certain architects?
This ruling directly challenges our ability to integrate logic and emotion as complementary structural vectors in our democracy. For March finalization, raw exposure. Instead of merely lifting limits, imagine a national system where every registered voter receives a set amount of civic credits to allocate to campaigns or advocacy groups of their choice, ensuring broader participation. The real next move is integrating logic and emotion as complementary structural vectors, demanding that consent and dignity underpin our electoral process, not just capital. Across the globe, UN High Commissioner Volker Turk urges against the dehumanization of migrants in South Africa. This speaks to the very core of building resilient inner and civic architectures that favor consent, provenance, and dignity. For March finalization, raw exposure. Instead of relying solely on international appeals, consider establishing decentralized, community-managed welcome hubs integrated with the gig passport mesh, offering direct support and skill matching for migrants, bypassing traditional state-centric aid models. The real next move is to use myth, humor, and clear analysis to turn this confusion into actionable vectors, building civic architectures that embrace provenance and dignity for all. We've got someone on the line. Patching in a caller, go ahead.
It feels like the same cycle. Empathy preached, but borders stay hard. What's the real vector for change, beyond just naming the problem?
The vector is always agency, pattern auditor. It's in the blueprints we choose to draw and the tools we build to execute them. Our own artwork menu generator translates shared intent into real-world action.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.